Okay, so moving on to section 3 of chapter 10, we're looking at solving quadratic equations. And so what we're going to be doing first is solving ones that we can actually solve algebraically without having to do any type of factoring, so kind of solving for x. As this chapter moves along, we will be making these more and more complex. We're going to be talking about the completion of the square and the quadratic formula and different things like that to help us find them and if we have to factor them. So there are many different ways of solving these. But this is just kind of the quick, easiest way to solve for quadratic equations. Now, when we're finding solutions, if you're asked to find the solution, find the zeros, anything like that, what we're asked to do is that we're trying to find the x values of the quadratic that make the whole function equal to 0. Okay, so that makes the whole function equal to 0. Now, when we do this, what we're looking for is where it crosses the x-axis. That's kind of the goal. Where is it cross the x-axis at what x values? So if we look at this function where we have x squared minus 9 is equal to 0, and we look at the graph, we see that we've crossed the x-axis at negative 3 and positive 3. Okay, so we've crossed it at negative 3 and positive 3, meaning those would be our x intercepts. It is our solutions that we're looking for. Okay, and what we would do is that we could go through and we could solve this one, move the 9 over, and then you have your square root. Okay, and that is what we're looking for, is we're looking for where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, so let's say we have this function and we want to solve it without graphing. Now, if we don't want to do it, if we don't want to use graphing, all we're trying to do is we're trying to get x by itself. So if we have x by itself, the first thing we want to do is we want to move this 75 to the other side. Since it's a minus 75, we're going to have to add 75. So we add 75 to both sides, gets us our number. Okay, so we added 75 to both sides. And then after that, we have 3x squared equals 75, so we can divide both sides by 3. Now we have x squared is equal to 25. And the way to get rid of that squared is to square root both sides. Now, when you take the square root of a number, you have to remember you have both the positive and the negative of that number. Anytime you take a square root, you have to go plus or minus. Okay, so you'll always get two solutions whenever you do a square root. So you could write it this way. Another way you could write it is just with a plus minus in front of the number 5. So instead of writing out 5 and negative 5, you can write plus or minus 5, okay, like on the bottom. Now, if we were to graph this one, the graph to the right here shows this function graphed, and you see it's crossed at 5 and negative 5. So graphing it would be a way for you to check your work to see what or if you've done it correctly or incorrectly. Okay, so solving it is just getting the x by itself. Okay. All right. So take a second, find the zeros of this one. So solve for x in this equation. Okay, so again, you should have gotten two solutions, a positive and a negative of that number. So with this one, first thing we would want to do is we divide both sides by 4. And so when we divide both sides by 4, we're left with x squared is equal to 4. And then we just take our square root. Okay, square root, which gets us our plus or minus 2. Now, if you were to graph this, you end up getting your function looking something like this. Okay, so again, same thing. Here's our solutions. It's where we're crossing the x-axis for our numbers. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for where does it cross the x-axis of our functions. So negative 2 and positive 2 in this case. Again, solving for x. Okay, so now the next one, okay, if we go through and we solve this one, okay, so I subtract 54 on both sides, subtract 54, okay, I end up with 6x squared equals a negative 54, and then I would divide both sides by 6, divide both sides by 6, and we get x squared is equal to negative 3. Now, if I take the square root of that, what do I get? If you typed it into your calculator, you would notice that it would say something like no real solutions or anything. And that's because what happens is that you can't take the square root of a negative number. You can't take the square root of negative 9, you can't take the square root of negative 4, you can't take the square root of negative 1, you can't take the square root of any negative number. Because remember, a square root is when you take a number, a single number, and you multiply it by itself to get another number. anytime you multiply one number twice, okay, -4 and -4 gets you a positive number. +4 and +4 gets you a positive number. You can't get a negative. So that means that we would have no real solutions, okay, because we would be taking the square root of a negative. Now, the reason I say real is because in Algebra 2, we start talking about imaginary numbers, or the letter I. Okay, but in this class, if you get something like this, you would just say there's no real solution, there's no solution, anything like that. Okay, and if you graph it, you'll notice that you have the parabola never crossing the x-axis. So because it never crosses the x-axis right here, okay, it never goes below that x line, that's when we have no solution or no real solution. Okay, so if you have to take the square root of a negative, you would just say it's no solution, no real solution. Again, type it into your calculator. Okay, so take a second and find the zeros of this function. So we have 7x squared plus 49 is equal to 36, or 63. Okay, so first thing you would want to do is you'd want to subtract 49 on both sides. When you do that, you end up with 14. So 7x squared equals 14. Divide both sides by 7, gets you 2, and then you take the square root of that. And as you notice, you end up with a decimal, which is fine. Decimal, round it to about 3 decimal places. So x is equal to plus or minus 1.414. And when we graph this, we see that we have our function and we are crossing it at somewhere between 0 and 1. So you won't always get nice round numbers. When you're graphing these, you just kind of estimate where it is. Okay, but sometimes you won't get nice round numbers. You'll get some square roots for those. Okay. All right, so there's your homework for section 3. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be solving for the x value, and yeah.